Hello, film fans. Welcome to the Film vs. Film podcast. My name is Martin Harries, your host, and I'm joined by the film encyclopedia man, Boaz Dix. We are a couple of filmmakers on occasion, but mainly can't stop yapping about movies. On this podcast, every episode we pick a topic from a film that's coming out at the cinema or on VOD. Myself and Boaz pick our favourite film from that topic, or team up against a guest and battle it out to decide which film will become the greatest film of all time. If you enjoy this podcast, please leave us a 5-star review and subscribe. Please enjoy part 2. Hello, welcome back to part 2 of the podcast, where we are talking David Cronenberg films. And of course, this is the part where I read your Instagram responses from the previous episode. And that previous episode, of course, was on Martin Scorsese films, relating that to his new film, The Killers of the Flower Moon, which I must say is excellent. Go see it now. Of course, after you've listened to this, of course. But we have a few responses from the World of Horror podcast. They went with Goodfellas. The Movie Gap went with Goodfellas, The Only Answer. Red View Films went with, yep, you guessed it, Goodfellas. And Anton Kinelove went with Gangs of New York, which is a surprising one. I would say one of his lesser films in terms of quality, personally. We didn't pick Goodfellas for our episode. That was, oh god, Taxi Driver versus The Departed. There we go. And we do explain why we didn't pick Goodfellas. Quinn, I'm intrigued. What is your Martin Scorsese film of choice?
The Departed is one of my feel good movies.
Yeah.
I love The Departed so much. I love a lot of his stuff. I haven't seen his new one yet. For some reason, I was convinced it didn't come out until Thanksgiving or Christmas. So I just realized the other day that it's out, and I'm stoked. I'm so excited for this one. But, I mean, just right off the top of my head, I'm going to go Departed, because I adore it.
Yeah. Is it the creative swearing for you, or is it Alec Baldwin just sucker punching that guy?
It's everything. It's everything. I feel weirdly related to every character in that film. I don't know, and I know that doesn't sound good either, but like I just do. I don't know. I don't know. I love it. It makes me. I feel I'm gonna watch it after this, like because it's in my head now. I love it. I love the opening, that long opening. Just that tickles my soul. I love an extended opening so much. It's one of my favorite things in movies, and I just. Like the soundtrack and the opening, the soundtrack alone, my God, he's so great with soundtracks. I do love Gangs of New York too, though, but The Departed off the top of my head.
So The Brood then, I kind of went for this one because like I hadn't seen it before and I was really intrigued about what was going on here, and I hadn't seen a lot of like his really early stuff, but the Brood really intrigued me, and like I do love The Fly as well, and a lot of his later stuff is kind of really interesting. But I definitely wanted to go for like a hardcore horror film for this episode. I really liked this film. I thought it was really creative and genuinely scary. There were many moments in this film where I was pretty scared. Not only from Samatha Eggars, who is terrifying in this movie, frankly. Those eyes, my God. So what happens in The Brood? Well, a man tries to uncover an unconventional psychologist's therapy technique on his institutionalized wife amidst a series of brutal murders. Yeah, that's pretty much how the film goes. So initial reactions then, Christina, what did you make of this one?
I like it too. I think this was the second time I had seen it. I also just sort of want to fill in some of the gaps of my own, horror knowledge. And Rabid is buck wild too. I'm not sure if you've seen Rabid, but this one, I heard a lot about it. And so, yeah, I think this was the second watch, and I love this film.
Quinn, initial reactions?
I think this probably was my second watch with this one too. I watched this in a film class in college where my instructor was just like, he was all about horror, and the whole class was horror. And even we had films that we watched in class, and then there was kind of like an out of class syllabus as well. This was on there. I don't know if it was in class or out of class, but I remember just being like, what? When I first saw it. And then whenever I can't make sense of something and it sticks in my head, it kind of like haunts me. This is one of those movies that it did kind of haunt me. And yeah, I liked it too. I thought it was, I had a lot of fun watching it. It's freaking crazy. There's so much, there's like layers and layers and layers of weird. There's a lot of unique stuff in it. It's not one that you can guess ahead of time. It's so out there. I mean, I don't even fully know what it is, but so that's fun.
I think the film does a kind of interesting job that you don't necessarily need to know like the science of this. It's just, it's building on your imagination of what the film is telling you of what's happening kind of thing. So I really like that aspect too. So directing then, like the first few scenes are like very like simply directed, which I always really like in horror films, to like establish this like normalcy and quiet build up before the horror starts. Like when the horror does start with like Juliana Kelly's death scene, like David Cronenberg uses a lot of like odd angle shots and tracking shots of the kitchen being trashed. And you only get like a few glimpses of this little person in the red coat, but you don't get like a clear indication of where this person is in relation to the kitchen and in relation to where all these things are being trashed from. So I quite kind of like that aspect of his directing, and you can't compute what's actually happening kind of thing. Then I love the moment where like Juliana Kelly like looks up at something in the kitchen and you can see the dread in her eyes before the music starts. And I love like the reverse angle shot of Kelly like moving in the way of the little person's face before you get like a chance to see it properly. Like the way you can see, just his arms out with like the meat mallet with Kelly's head there in shot was great just before she attacks her. Like the first shot of this like hatch as well at the start of the scene, like moving in slowly, and the milk and the person's arm like bursting through made me jump out of my skin. That was pretty terrifying.
I really like that scene. I mean, just the stuff like falling down from the cupboards. And I think there is like a really like low angle shot. But yeah, you're not really sure like where is this creature? What is going on? And I think Juliana is so funny in a way because she's just sort of like walking, into danger. But it's so kind of strange. Like what is actually happening? She thinks that she like set the dishes, she hasn't secured the dishes in her kitchen or something. And she goes to check.
They get a lot of earthquakes in Canada.
Yeah, I think it's a great opener.
I think Barton Kelly's death scene is a little bit more telegraphed for me, but still very effective. Like, I think his time is up because when he returns home, everything like slows down a little bit, and you get that very like high angle shot of him like crying on the floor, and you're like, oh, okay, something could happen here. Also, as far as we know, the deadly child in the red coat is like still in the house. Then again, like the pace is pretty slow and very like simply directed in fairly like wide shots. Then when Barton lies on the bed, there's a lot more like movement with the camera, and you're like, something's going to happen soon. Then when the hands of the child creature come out from under the bed, many chills went down my spine. Even though like the camera is definitely telling you, yeah, he's under the bed. The attack itself is a lot wider than before, and you get like a good look at what this creature looks like. And as you would expect, it ain't pretty. So I liked how Cronenberg changes it up a little bit, but we also have like a progression of what our characters are coming up against rather than hiding things for the sake of it. Plus, we have like a new intrigue of like, why has this character just died, when Frank arrives? So I thought it was certainly those first two scenes, I think, just wonderfully crafted, even though like Cronenberg is making it kind of obvious that he's under the bed, but you're so sucked in. Well, I was sucked in of just like, oh my God, something's going to happen soon. Like, how did I miss this, that he's under the bed?
Yeah. And he's kind of drunk then. Right. And so like, it's really weirdly intimate where he's like right behind him and sort of like the moment of meeting him, you know, with his like his pause or his, you know, slowness of being in this emotional state and being pretty drunk is really just well done. And I also love the first death scene and like the chaos of the kitchen stuff. And I still I don't understand how like a big orange juice and milk carton can come out of a laundry chute. I don't get it. But because I've got a laundry chute or in my parents' house in Michigan. I mean, it's like 4 or 5 inches. I don't get it. But
Canadians are weird, I suppose. I don't know. With their milk and juice.
yeah.
They have the kitchen upstairs. I don't know. Quick access.
Yeah.
You need some milk from downstairs. Okay, use the laundry chute. That'll do.
Dumbwaiter. Maybe it's a dumbwaiter.
Yeah.
I like it that we see the creature though too, Martin, like right away.
Yeah.
I think, you know, it's nice to sort of, you know, have that instead of having it be this mystery where it doesn't need to be. And the creature is so odd looking and looks like a child, but also like kind of mutated again, I guess. And sort of an animal and sort of a monster. You're not really sure what you're looking at.
Yeah, I quite like it because obviously, you know, this is a fairly low budget. This is Cronenberg's one of Cronenberg's early films, so they were kind of forced to be quite creative with the makeup design of the creatures. So I kind of like that they don't do anything like too out there. I think it's important as well for the horror that like this definitely looks like some sort of human being in there, but it's definitely not. You know, it's not like crazy makeup at all that you're like, oh yeah, there's no human in there at all. So I do quite like that aspect. It makes it scarier that it's just like subtle differences here, you know, working with their limitations. I thought it was brilliant makeup design. Ruth Mayer's death, like the school teacher, is a lot more straightforward, but again, just as effective, even though we have like more information about what these creatures are. Like, I just like how simple it is as well. And you realize that the 2 new kids that come into the room are creatures because they just walk straight up to Candy at perfect angles and don't say anything and take her away. They do the same thing to Ruth Mayer, just walk up to her, but instead they're holding mallets. Not sure why you would have like mallets in a kindergarten school, but there we go. When they attack, the shots are kind of like really wide as they've been in the film. So you would think that it would look quite goofy and silly, but I think it's violent enough that it's still quite scary. And you don't get that kind of sense of goofiness at all. Plus, you get to see the creatures' faces a lot more, but Cronenberg does still hide them a bit too in tighter shots. So, you know, just of their like bodies cutting off their heads in the shot. So when you see their faces, it still has quite an impact. So yeah, I think all 3 of the death scenes are really well constructed in very like specific ways in terms of like the progression of what you're seeing and learning about these creatures other than what's being said in the script.
Yeah, the death of the kindergarten teacher is it seems very sad. And isn't there like an insert shot of like her hand reaching out and her hand is bloody and she just seems like completely helpless. And there are these kids, you know, standing around and they're not intervening at all. And yeah, it just happens. And to me, it just seems very sad. And maybe it's the wide angle that you're talking about. Like we're just watching and we're helpless. We just have to watch it play out too.
I just think about those kids and how much therapy they'll require.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then I mean, by that time I was like, what's their method of killing? Well, head wound, right? But like they're small, like, so how can they bank on that? And so I don't know, when I watched that scene, I was kind of watching for like the choreography of like what one of them does to get her sort of like down, and then the other one comes with the mallet, and then the other one's got the mallet. But yeah, something like what you said, Christina, the idea of the kids just standing there and not being able to do anything kind of is reflective of the audience as well. Just like, oh, we went too far. And at this point, like I said, upon first watch, I could never tell you what actually occurs. I would have just said that movie is weird and crazy. But then this time, when she's killed, I didn't put it together until the doctor kind of lays it out later that the violence is reflective of her rage and it's carrying out what she feels inside. So I didn't put that together necessarily. Like I could see that those characters were threats to her, but didn't make that connection. As an audience, first time seeing it, you feel really helpless in that moment because, like, number one, there's a ton of innocent kids watching. Number two, they've taken candy away somewhere. And then, number three, it's completely violent. And the way that they get the teacher down, because she is very tall. And, with the dad, he was already on the bed, so that's easy.
That's an easy kill there.
Yeah. You don't have that at the end when the doctor is killed by the brood. You don't get that like wide angle, but you're also seeing, other things going on at the same time, the parallel editing and stuff. But until the end, and then you see sort of like what they've done to him just lying there.
Yeah. Yeah, they used a lot of their spare blood on poor Oliver Reed there, lying on the floor.
Yeah.
Christina, favorite shot or scene?
I mean, it's hard to beat the reveal of Samatha Eggar and what's under her very strange shirt or blouse, or I'm not sure, where she lifts up these the sleeves of her shirt. And she looks like a weird butterfly. And then she's like demonstrates that there's this growth coming out of her middle. And then it continues from that point. But I think that was such a whammy when I first saw it, that I was like, what? That it's, really hard to beat that one for me.
Quinn, favorite scene or shot for you?
Okay, this is one that I noted while watching it. And this is not memorable, I don't think necessarily. It's not like the big reveal, but I really like the scene where when the dad comes back and he's like, I think I'm going to go to the house. And right when he gets there, he sees, the dead person tape in the hallway of like in the shape of, his ex-wife kind of like in the fetal position. And you have a really cool shot looking down, and he sort of starts to like caress where her arm was taped. And I don't know, it struck me as like a beautiful shot within this really weird, chaotic, crazy film, but just like a moment of like not normalcy. It's not normal, but like a breath, and it was emotional. And I really liked that shot. I don't know, I thought it was just neat the way he like, I don't know, I liked the attention that he was paying to the tape. And as horrific and scary and awkward as that is, like you can watch that and be like, ew, weird. But I thought it was beautiful.
Weirdly beautiful.
Yeah.
So for me, it's kind of like that whole last scene for sure. I think the film does a brilliant job of just really building suspense and tension leading up to this last scene for me. Where like Frank and Dr. Raglan team up to save Candy, and I loved how like the suspense is constantly there in both situations, where like Frank sees his wife to try and keep her calm, and the brood reflects that what emotions Nola is going through. So Dr. Raglan can just walk out of the shed unharmed, but of course that doesn't happen. But I loved how Cronenberg keeps cutting from each scene, and I liked how each scene's suspense just goes up a notch with each cutback. In the shed, like in the house with the brood and Dr. Raglan, you see more of the brood wake up, just watching Raglan, seeing what he's doing. And with Frank and Nola, every time Frank says something, you're not sure how Nola is going to react. Like the pivotal moment comes with Frank, and Nola, as you said, Christina, lifts up her dress, I guess, and you see this like really disgusting sack thing growing on her body, and you think that's gross enough, but she like bites the sack open, and yeah, you missed that part, Christina. and licks the baby brood clean, like a lioness cleaning her baby cub kind of thing. Very animalistic, I would say. And it's so visceral and shocking, and you would expect that to be like the climactic moment of the film, but it's not. Like, we still have like Dr. Raglan trying to calmly escape the brood with Candy, but of course, when unsurprisingly Frank is freaked out about what he's seen, like the brood attack and kill Dr. Raglan pretty quickly. Then you have like this brilliant cutting back and forth of Frank strangling Nola and the brood trying to get to Candy from behind the door, like crashing through the walls with her arms. So I loved how the last scene just keeps this tension up even after we've seen the most impactful moment in the film. So I just love how that last scene is constructed. I think it's just really well done. It kind of second guesses you as well. Like, you see this incredible moment, you're like, oh my God, what am I watching? And that ain't the end. Loved it.
Hey, I'm James Lovino, and I'm here to tell you about Alternate Sides, a movie podcast with a twist. I've worked in the film business for 2 decades, but I haven't actually seen that many movies, and this has been driving my frequent collaborator, Sam, a self-confessed film snob, crazy. So every week, while he's stuck in his car trying to avoid getting a parking ticket, thanks to New York City's alternate side parking regulations, we discuss a classic film I've finally just gotten around to seeing. Alternate Sides, a new podcast about movies, parking, and a 25-year friendship, wherever you get your podcasts.
I was going to say, just thinking back, I feel like if Dr. Raglan really wanted the best case scenario here, he would have maybe warned Frank that she's got something cooking underneath her dress. I mean, I feel like if you prepare someone a little for that, things could go better, but...
I feel like, though, to be fair to Dr. Raglan, he'd be like, if he tried to explain that to Frank, he would not believe him at all. I'd be like, yeah, there's no point. Just discover it for yourself.
I think that's right, because he's like, she is their actual mother. And, Frank is kind of like, what the hell do you mean? And I don't think he would have gotten it. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you can imagine it, him trying to attempt to explain it.
Yeah, you're right. It wouldn't have happened.
Yeah, so your wife is like growing all these creepy kids on like the outside of her stomach as a separate organism. I don't know. And Frank's like, yeah, okay, I'm just going to go in and see for myself because that sounds crazy. Oh no, he's right. So directing score, guys, what are you going for The Brood?
Just having that conversation, I feel like, man, that's just a beautiful, beautiful example of parallel editing done well. Done to really build and build and build. And that's what it's supposed to do. And I think it's often done really poorly where it just doesn't work. And it's like, what are you doing? Like, you're not doing this right. I don't know. So, I don't know. I feel maybe higher than Dr. Eggars. What do you think, Christina? I would say...
Oh, gosh. Well, 8.7 is what popped into my head.
I'm going to go 8. So, want to meet in the middle or something with 8.4?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I was thinking 8.7 as well. So, I'll go 8.7. Right, screenplay then. Like, after Juliana Kelly's death by this crazy child in the red coat, it seems very like vague about how this crazy child appears in Juliana's house. And like the only connection we have is like the scene before is where like Dr. Hal Raglan, Oliver Reed, is doing some like therapy on Samatha Eggar's character, Nola Carveth. And he wants to like see the anger for her mother to come through. And then we get like these piercing eyes from Samatha Eggars as she looks up, and then it cuts to Juliana's death scene. So you're like, there's some sort of like connection there with that simple cut. Then when Franklin Carveth goes to visit a previous patient of Dr. Hal Raglan to see if he can like take him to court, I think, about what's happening to his wife. So he shows like Frank the effects of the psychoplasmic therapy on his neck, which looked disgusting. You only see it for a brief moment, but it's like, oh my God. So now you're like, okay, what could be happening here with Nola? Because she seems a lot crazier than this guy. So the film definitely sparks your imagination and intrigue about what these psychoplasmics can do in this film. Obviously, we know that when she lifts up her dress to reveal that growth. But yeah, I just kind of like how the film kind of plays with your imagination.
Yeah, I think there's just so much going on in this film, even though it's a pretty short film. And it's kind of hard to put together, like, what's the connection between the therapy and this creature that's killing people. And even when it's sort of explained that there's this physical manifestation of people's like anger and working through their trauma and all this other stuff, it's still like that guy with the neck. I was kind of like, what is happening with this guy? And Frank is so skeptical that I think it's good, because I myself was like, this is a very interesting idea that Cronenberg's trying to give to us, and I'm not really sure I get it completely. So I think Frank's skepticism is really
important for the story. Yeah,
a good thing. Yeah,
I don't think you're not necessarily supposed to like know the ins and outs of how this is actually happening. I mean, the whole therapy sessions, it's just kind of very unclear about like how these physical manifestations are happening to her and the brood, etc. But you kind of just go with it, and I went with it. I think it was a great idea. And you said, Christina, that this idea was from Cronenberg about his own divorce. And I remember him saying that it's like Kramer versus Kramer, but more realistic for him. I guess that says a lot more about Cronenberg, and his own divorce. But I guess he's just kind of manifesting his kind of frustrations in his own personal life in these creatures, I guess.
And I'm not sure how this read for you guys, but there was a lot of crazy shit that was going on in the 70s in terms of like primal scream therapy and like, I don't know what they call it. Like there was this one thing where you were supposed to like go through your own birth, and that was like supposed to transform you. I mean, there's a lot of weird stuff. Yeah. So wow. I feel like it's so, I mean, I've just heard tell. I didn't participate in any of this stuff, but I think it's great that he has that in this movie, because there was a lot of weird shit that people experimented with during this time. And so I'm just, because I think that this therapy just seems ridiculous, so I'm glad that he sort of has that angle on it in this film.
I agree with you. I think that honestly, the opening shot, I know, Martin, you were like, I like it how it's normal in the beginning. And I was like, oh, I was so not feeling that was normal. That was a horror. I mean, you're right. There's so much going on. There's so many like different horror movies going on that actually work together. But to me, the therapy is the most horrific thing, because it's so realistic, and like the control that he has over his patients. And then I started thinking about the guy who, Frank was consulting with, who was going to sue him, and his growths. And I do feel like there's so much here that you're risking, because you have to really have people trust you. And I actually do trust him enough to not ask a bunch of questions. Like I wasn't, usually I'm like, well, this is this and this is that. And I like really try to figure out stuff. Or if they don't provide me with enough, then I'm like mad about that. I'm not mad about that here. But I do kind of feel like the guy, the former patient, maybe was the idea that he had these growths that had turned into lymphatic cancer. Like, are we supposed to believe that this is the result of like the therapy not fully met because he didn't have his own brood, but like he was getting there, and then I don't know. I do want to know that, but yeah, I'm with you in that I don't care so much about like, I'm okay to go on this trip with him because he does enough of something that makes me trust him. But I do also agree that I like that he showed this weird therapy, because to me, that's like the horror movie here is that creepy type of therapies.
I guess I need to clarify what I mean by like normal beginning. I didn't mean like the therapy stuff. I meant like the scenes with Frank and his daughter. That was like, fairly normal.
Yes, no, and I totally agree with you. I didn't mean to like.
No, that's fine.
I just thought it was funny because that was the opening scene, and I was like.
But I agree. Like the film definitely treads a fine line, like walks a tightrope with the audience of that, like the film is not giving you a lot of answers here, and it's playing with your imagination versus what information you have in the film already. So, I mean, I was happy to walk that tightrope, really, and I got to the other end, and I was satisfied for sure. So, I guess for some people, they're like, I need way more answers about how this psychoplasmic therapy works, but I don't think that's really the point for me about how it exactly works. I think you just have to go with it, really, and that Nola's rage is just being manifested into physical things, and you just get drip fed information about who the brood are.
And actually, I think that's pretty insightful. I mean, we do know about generational trauma now in this time period. And I feel like, especially with the whammy at the end, we know that there's going to be horror to come with the child. But if Nola is working through the abuse that she experienced and the neglect that her father manifested, and this is sort of being acted out on the kid, I think that's pretty insightful. I mean, that is kind of how it works, So,
yeah.
I wanted to mention just sort of briefly, you can cut this if you want, Martin, but like about Existenz, I just wanted to put in a little plug for that, because even though that was 1999, I mean, I think he had a lot, in mind in terms of things that have come to pass in terms of gaming, so far as I understand it. So you might want to check it out for that reason. And here too, I think he had like insight into psychological ideas that we sort of take for granted now.
Oh yeah, definitely. I agree with that. That we take these kind of ideas for granted, for sure. I think the reveal that Nola is the real threat is really cool for me, because throughout the film you think that Dr. Raglan is the real villain here. He's just using Nola as an experiment in these psychoplasmic sessions. Like, the more information you learn about what's happened to the other characters and how deadly like the little creatures are, you're like, Dr. Raglan has to be the puppet master in this story. But when he sees that one of the creatures has made the papers, you feel like he's lost control of Nola. So when Frank comes to the house and confronts Dr. Raglan that he's kidnapped Candy, Dr. Raglan explains what's going on with Nola, that these creatures are an extension of her rage. So they basically like team up and try and save Candy. So I always find it a fascinating dynamic that our hero has to work together with someone who thought was like the villain of the film, but actually the threat is much more powerful than we first realize. Plus, you have like the added threat that you're not entirely convinced that Dr. Raglan can be trusted in the final act as well. So I kind of like that little aspect of the final act too.
I think the acting is really good, because I found him to be super creepy, but in the context of the film, like Mike, really put a lot of his trust in this doctor, and is kind of ruined when he doesn't have the connection with him. So
he doesn't have a lot of choice, does he?
No.
Yeah, he has to just kind of trust this guy, even though he really doesn't like him at all.
Yeah.
I always like that dynamic in films. I found like the last few seconds of the final scene like really interesting, and a little unsure whether it was actually needed, because I thought it may have like muddied the rules of the world here when you see like the little lumps appear on Candy's arm as Frank drives away. I read the film that these physical deformities occur from like Dr. Raglan's psychoplasmic therapy sessions, like on his patients. So in the last scene, it suggests that it could be a genetic thing from Nola, but there's no reason why like Dr. Raglan has actually like performed some psychoplasmic therapy on Candy when she was there, when she was kidnapped. So what do we reckon about like the last few seconds here?
Well, she's really the only one we know that survived an attack from them, right? I mean, because they don't really hurt. Do they hurt Frank? Am I like misremembering this? But Candy's really survived several attacks from the Brood.
But she's been through it all, though. I mean, she's like extremely traumatized, and I think the child actor is great because she just constantly looks like she's in a state of shock. And I took the bumps to sort of mean that they were manifestations of her trauma that were just sort of bubbling out of her skin.
Interesting. Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
I thought it was kind of like it could only work if you had sessions with Dr. Raglan, maybe. I don't know. That he's kind of bringing out the rage in people.
Well, I had a question about her bruises in the begining. Did the Brood cause the bruises on Candy's body?
Possibly, because I think in the beginning, like they were allowing Candy to visit Nola. So,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what Dr. Raglan says, that they did beat her up or pushed her and scratched her.
So interesting and funny lines, people. There aren't that many, I don't think, that I picked up on. But certainly one that caught my ear was, I think, one during one of the therapy sessions, and I think either Samatha Eggars or Oliver Reed says, "They're bad mummies. They're fucked up mummies." Which is kind of funny.
What was the one? Quinn thought we should put one of them on a t-shirt. Do you remember the line, Quinn?
Psychoplasmatics, the ultimate therapeutic device, or the leading therapeutic device?
Yeah. I want that t-shirt. I'm getting that.
I know.
Okay.
We'll
make it, and we'll get your size, Martin, and we'll send it for Christmas.
I am a large.
All right.
Yeah, I think that's cool that you pointed out that when he was saying that, when they were having that conversation, because I mean, at that point, you're not putting anything together. I don't think anybody is putting the two together, because I think that's before she dies. Her mother dies, so of course you're not putting it together. That was so weird. I mean, that paired with the initial opening therapy sequence with Mike and him acting as his father, and just some of the language out of that was so weird too.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
I think the film definitely like treads a line of trying to be weird and crazy, but if it goes too far, it could seem quite funny. And certainly that line, was a bit funny to me. Especially as they're saying it so sincerely, in a very serious manner. I think my favorite line though is from the guy with the weird thing on his neck, and like towards the end of that scene he says, "I'm not alone, I mean, I'm in touch with a lot of people who did psychoplasmics. We might form a club."
That's another t-shirt. That's great.
Yeah, I'm getting that t-shirt too.
We did psychoplasmics or something.
Yeah, psychoplasmics.
Psychoplasmics Club.
Yeah.
Screenplay score, guys. What are you going for the Brood?
Somewhere in the 7s, Quinn?
Yeah. 7.5.
Okay.
I really liked it as well. Again, I'm a guy that I really don't mind things being not explained for me. I do love films where like I have to use my imagination of why things are happening in films. That's definitely up my bag, and I just think how the film is structured as well is beautifully done. I guess it could have made it slightly more clearer with what like Frank and Nola's relationship was like. Like there's not really much of a backstory between what these people were before Nola enters this clinic. You don't get any of that, but I didn't really mind that. I think it was kind of really focusing on the horror side of this therapy stuff, which it's just kind of really freaky, and yeah, I really like that aspect, and just the creativity of the horror as well. As I've said, is just, I love creative horror films, so really trying to use your imagination to create the scariest stuff rather than relying on like your stereotypical monster movie. You know, I feel like David Cronenberg has really thought about the aesthetics and how these, you know, creatures have been created. I can imagine like there's a lot of writing that we don't see in preparation for Cronenberg of how all this works organically and stuff, and the designs, and I expect there's loads of drawings here. So I feel like he's worked this out a lot in his head. So I really appreciate that, and we only see what we need to know in the film. Not to say that it's not like really complex storytelling, because it's not. I don't think it is a fairly simple story. I think not too dissimilar to like a slasher film, really. When you think about it, in terms of the way it's structured. So it's kind of really well done of how it's like disguising that, I guess. So I think I might go like an 8.2 for me. Right, acting then. The first like striking thing about this film is like the very first scene, as you mentioned, Quinn with Oliver Reed as he's like acting in this like simple like theater performance thing. Like being very aggressive and domineering to the other performer, Mike, and you later learn that it's a patient. You know, Oliver Reed like always brings this very like masculine persona to him in any scene he's in any movie. Frankly, he's always the person you notice first in a scene. Even in the next scene with Art Hindle, who plays Frank Carviff, Frank is demanding an explanation of why his daughter has bruises on her back, and after visiting her mother, you're never like convinced for one moment that Oliver Reed is gonna be like swayed by Frank at all. Like he's always like the dominant presence in every scene. Yeah, I thought Oliver Reed is great in this film.
Oh yeah, I did too. He scared the shit out of me.
Yeah, he's so creepy. I mean, really well done. Yeah, I just sort of always feel a little bit off balance when he's talking. I like Samatha Eggar. I thought she was really great.
Oh, yeah.
She was terrifying.
Yeah. And I mean, I really don't know her like whole body of work, but I remember her from The Collector, and she's completely a different character in this. And yeah, she's also very scary.
Yeah. She's not in it that much compared to the rest of the main cast, but boy, does she have an impact with those therapy sessions with Oliver Reed. Like, at times, you're not really sure what, like, conscious state she's in. Like, is she her adult self, or is she, like, in the mind of her child self? Sometimes it's quite clear, but others, you're really not sure. And I definitely see that as a good thing, definitely, and it makes her like incredibly unpredictable and just creates like a lot of brilliant mystery on how she's manipulating and creating these like creatures. Like her eyes are just incredibly piercing. It's unbelievable. You know,
Yeah.
I was like, please put sunglasses on in the next scene.
Yeah, and by the end, I mean, I think she just develops this character so beautifully, and it's shocking at the end when she says, you know, you think you know me, but I would rather kill Candy than have her be with you. And it's like, as a mother, I mean, going through all this really emotional, traumatic therapy, and then also she says, I don't know what she calls it at the end. She's like, I've been on my own little adventure and I'm pretty important. You know, this whole experience, of course, it's just anything that someone would go through that's this traumatic and scary, you still would never envision them saying that to their former partner about their child.
That's pretty dark stuff.
Yeah.
I liked Oliver Reed when he like sees the newspaper photo of the dead creature, and he like never takes his eyes off it when he's talking to his colleague about like getting everyone out of the house apart from Nola. And he looks incredibly still and nervous when when previously in this film you never got that sense that he would be scared of anything. So you're like, he knows exactly what this creature was. So I think the film does a brilliant job of like ramping up the intrigue and tension in the acting as well as the writing and directing. I think it all marries together really in this film brilliantly in all aspects. I think the only thing I would say about the acting is the little actress who plays Candy, Cindy Hines, is really not very good. But the film makes an attempt to try and like contextualize her bad acting, where I think one of the doctors after the first murder says that she's like been traumatized, but by what's happened, so that's why she like looks so blank faced. So I appreciate that, but there are other times where she's supposed to look really scared, but I'm not entirely convinced at times. So I can definitely feel David Cronenberg like off camera trying to make her act, you know, I don't know, like doing crazy things off camera.
Also, I don't think that Art Hendel is very good at all, and
Really?
I don't know if this was also like he has been through a trauma, you know, just the trauma of the divorce or something. But he just seems very flat to me. And like starting with learning that his mother-in-law has been murdered, he has like no reaction at all to that. And he just seems very kind of like flimsy. And maybe it's in comparison to Oliver Reed's like hyper masculinity, as you were saying, but I don't know. Every time there was a scene where he was featured, I was like, oh no, here we go. I just wasn't, impressed by him at all.
Were you not impressed by Art Hindle, Quinn, or was he all right for you?
I liked him actually, and he just looks like a little guy, like a little boy. Like his face just looks like a little boy to me. I liked him. The one thing about Candy that I do agree with is her reaction to seeing her grandmother lying on the floor dead threw me off. It actually like threw me down a road of like, this little girl's doing stuff because of her reaction. And it was so just sort of straight faced. There was an emotion. Would I understand the idea of like not being able to handle a trauma like that, anybody not being able to handle a trauma like that in the moment, especially a child. But it really threw me off, and it made me think that there was something that she was doing that killed the grandmother, just having not seen it in a really long time and remembering any of the details. So that might be bad. This is so slight, but something else that threw me off was that Frank and Dr. Ragland's assistant look so similar that in the very beginning when his assistant is like, okay, now everyone can go home. Thanks for coming. The next scene you see Frank, I'm like, oh, I guess he works there and his daughter is there. Like it just threw me down a weird road just because I thought they looked so alike.
Yeah, too similar. I can see that definitely. I guess with Art Hindle's character, I guess he just really hated his mother-in-law.
I guess, yeah.
He's like, she's dead. Oh well. I just want to find out what's happening to my daughter.
Yeah, he didn't really have a whole lot of sympathy for the father-in-law either, though. No. Like when he comes to town, he wasn't really offering any sympathetic side for him.
Yeah, and then tries to date the teacher.
He's not really very fond of his ex-wife either. I mean, he's,
no.
But I mean, to be fair, I really didn't like either one of these parents. I thought they were awful. And I felt like the wife, well, before I understood really what was going on, I'm like, why is she spending so much time away from her kid? Like, that just seems like the height of selfishness. And I get it that you're going through something or something, but I was just like, I hate them both. I mean, they both just didn't seem to have any real connection to their kid. And apparently that's what this whole war was about, was the kid. So I just kind of hated them both.
Yeah, I also, just to add, I'm sorry, there's that really little scene when they're looking for Candy and they take the police officers to her old apartment, and it is like a hallway with a bunch of religious stuff on the walls. And he says something like, this is where my ex-wife and daughter lived when we separated. can you believe I've never been here? And it's like the weirdest living space for a mother and daughter. It's like an attic.
Yeah.
So much as like I am with you, Martin, and I want to go along with like the less details of the Brood, I think the better, because I think the more details Cronenberg were to give us, the less likely we would be able to just sit back and really enjoy this one like we do.
Yeah.
But then if you add stuff like that, then it does make me a little bit interested in knowing a little of the backstory. Like, I don't think we need it for the story, but once you start adding stuff like that, it's going to make your audience ask some questions that you probably don't want them asking. Like, I just got stuck in that scene for a minute, and I was so weirded out by it.
I think for me, like, I think it's just kind of an extension of what, like, Nola's character really is with this little apartment and all this religious imagery. And I guess also with Frank's decision, or, you know, he thinks that she may have gone to this room, just it kind of expresses how, like, separated and how they don't really know each other that well, really, in his decision to go up to that room, that she might have gone up there, that they don't really know each other as husband and wife as much. That's how I kind of saw that. But again, like, you're doing a lot of your own work in terms of that aspect in watching the movie. So yeah, I would admit, like, certainly in the script, like, I think maybe there could have been a little bit more backstory. But again, yeah, maybe, Quinn, as you're saying, that would entice you to ask more questions about what the hell's going on, and you're like, then you're definitely falling off the tightrope. You're not getting to the other side.
Yeah.
Favorite performance, Christina? Who are you going for?
I think I'm going for Oliver Reed. I think that he
Nice.
was really creepy and consistently so, and you kind of never knew where you stood with him, and I think that's great for the character.
Quinn?
Samantha Eggars, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I just think she developed that impeccably.
Yeah, I'm going with Samatha Eggars as well. I think she's just really, really scary. I feel like you don't really see performances like that. I guess certainly these days, like, performances like that, you don't really see it very much, because a lot of, you know, of the later generation would see it as kind of too weird and too out there. But I found it quite terrifying. I was like, oh my God, those eyes, man. Whew. They're like laser beams.
Martin, then you definitely have to see Infinity Pool.
All right.
Would you agree,
Cool.
Quinn?
Yeah, you got to check it out. You just do.
Okay.
I mean, that performance is, whew, she doesn't hold back.
Yeah, no.
So acting score, guys, what are you going for?
7?
Okay. Yeah, I felt like, you know, I don't know. I think we're kind of torn on this, but I think 7 is fine.
I mean, I would maybe go a little higher, but
I would go a little lower. That's what I mean. So I think it's I think that Eggar and Reed are very strong, but I don't think the rest of the cast is as strong. So
What are we saying then? 7, straight 7, or
7.1.
Okay. For me, I just think that, like, Samatha Eggars and Oliver Reed are really strong in this film. Yes, like, the kids, Cindy Hines isn't great, and I didn't mind Art Hindle. I thought he was okay, but I would agree he doesn't do anything particularly special. But I think he's got to be, like, your way into the film to have a little bit of normalcy. There has to be kind of a little bit of balance there with the acting, I think. So yeah, I think it's pretty impressive, certainly from Eggers and Reed. So I'll go like an 8.4 for me. Right, let's add up the scores then for The Brood. The Brood gets 48.3, so it wins by 1 point.
Oh my God.
Dead Ringers only got 47.3. So it is a miracle, people. I have won an episode. My losing streak has ended.
Congratulations.
I really didn't think it would end on this episode, but it has. Hurrah.
Hurrah.
As we English people say. The posh ones, anyway. next episode as The Killer will be available on Netflix. I think it's currently out in cinemas for a small release, but it will be out on Netflix in time for our next episode. And of course, we can only really talk about one man for The Killer, and that is David Cronenberg. So we'll be picking our favorite films for that one, and we'll have another returning guest for the episode, the good, the pod, and the ugly for that one. Guys, thank you so much for coming on. You have been amazing as always. This is your opportunity again to tell us about your podcast and where can we find you.
Thanks, Martin. This was a blast. Always
Pleasure.
love talking to you. And our podcast is World of Horror with Mom and Mac, and you can find us on all the platforms. We hope you do. Thanks.
Cool. All right, it's goodbye from Quinn. Bye-bye. Say goodbye.
Oh, I'm sorry. Say goodbye, Quinn. Bye, guys. Thank you.
And it's goodbye from Christina. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
And it's goodbye from me. I'm going to avoid all psychoplastic session clinic places, the weird Olive Reed places there is. Bye-bye. And just avoid Canada, I guess. Bye-bye. Too nice, those people. They're too nice. That's it for part 2. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed it. Check out part 1 if you haven't done so already. But don't stop there. Get involved and tell us what your favourite films are relating to the episodes. Send us a DM or comment on Instagram and TikTok at Film vs. Film Podcast, for Twitter at FVF_podcast. If you do, we'll give you a shout out on the next episode. If you're feeling really generous, you can buy us a one-off coffee at our Buy Me a Coffee account. Remember, please leave us a 5-star review and subscribe. Pod signing off.